Is Austin Matthews heating up at the right time for the Buds, entering a tough stretch in their schedule? Let's break down the weekend slate on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On at Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. What's going on, Dave? How are you feeling on a Friday?
Feeling good. All set for the weekend. Get a double dose. Talking weekend.
Yep, we got a back-to-back this weekend. Got the Washington Capitals, and then right after that, Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins. So pretty big couple of games here that the Maple Leafs have, obviously, this weekend. It would have been a lot cooler if Ovechkin was healthy, right? You got Ovi on one night and then right into Sid in the next night. But no Ovechkin for the Capitals. But they seem to keep rolling. Like this Caps team ain't no joke. Like I know Toronto beat them earlier in the season. They had that come from behind win in against Washington, and you know it's still a very quality team though. It's going to be a good game.
Yeah, they've been, in my opinion, probably one of the more surprising teams this year, considering they look like they were going to be on a decline. You know, the real only storyline of Washington was, will Ovechkin, go break the record this year? It's been like, now that team's first in the Metro now, albeit they have a lot of competition for first place, but their first place, I don't think anybody would have expected them to be first place.
No, I mean, I expected them to battle for the playoffs. I did like what they did over the offseason with the additions that they brought in, bringing in, PLD, Mangiapane, Chikrin. Like, I did like what they did, but it's a lot of the guys internally that have really stepped up there, right? Like, Dylan Strome is having a career year. He was there last season, but he's having a great year this season, along with Connor McMichael, who's having a breakout season. Alexi Protas is breaking out into a terrific player. And then obviously they made a big trade to go out and get Logan Thompson, who's given them real quality goaltending. So all around, it's been a pretty solid season for this group and for Spencer Carberry, former Maple Leaf coach. He's got that team, cooking. Even without Alex Ovechkin, they've still been able to rattle off wins and still score at an elite rate. They lead the NHL with over 4 goals per game. So, Toronto, they're going to have to make sure that they muster up some offense in this one, because I know that the Capitals, even without Ovechkin, have been dangerous offensively.
Yeah, they've been a tough team to stop offensively. Like obviously the blue line drives a lot of their offense too. They got a lot of guys stepping up with Ovechkin out. That's probably the most impressive part of this, is they have done this without Ovechkin in the lineup. And you look at it's also like players that have, they've drafted that have come through for them. I've always been big that Dylan Strome, that was a big coup by them. Really wanted the Leafs to get him, but clearly he found a good spot in Washington. He's essentially taken over for Nick Backstrom, which, it's an unfortunate end to what happened to Backstrom, but I'm sure the Caps are pretty happy that they were able to get Dylan Strome to just slide right into that role. And he's sort of fulfilling that potential that he wasn't during, in his first few years in the league. We were wondering if he was going to be one of those players that didn't live up to being a top draft pick.
Yeah.
It's looking like it right now.
He is. He's playing really, really well, and he, was somewhat in the conversation, I believe, or put himself in there for Team Canada at the Four Nations Cup. But well over a point per game for a while, was in the top 10 in points for the entire league. So it's an impressive group. That being said, Dave, I was a little surprised. Like, I know that Toronto usually has done pretty well against Washington. They've fared well, at least over the last little bit. But I wasn't sure, or I was a little surprised that they've fared this well. I was taking a look, how they've played in their last 10 games. The Leafs have won 9 of the last 10 meetings between these two teams. So Toronto really has owned this group, and they've won these pretty handily. Like, there's a lot of 4-1, 5-2, 6-2 games out here. It's not like they've all been pretty tight. So the Maple Leafs have matched up very well against this Capitals team in the past, and they did win earlier this year 4-3. Believe that game went to overtime, if I'm not mistaken. However, this is a different looking Capitals squad, as we've kind of alluded to. They've certainly they're a much better team than they were a season ago. That's for sure, in the way that they've been the last couple of years. But yeah, I really think that it's going to be a great game, and I'm looking at Austin Matthews though for the Maple Leafs to really keep the engine running hot. Right, his last 3 games since returning, he's got 5 points. He had a 2-goal performance the other night. He's got 3 goals his last 2 games. I think that they're going to have to look for him to continue that offense tonight to win.
Yeah, I feel like this game is pointing towards a shootout, like an offensive shootout between these things. Both teams want to show their offense. Austin Matthews knows coming off that big game. He's gonna this feels like one of those types of games. The Leafs are gonna be on a back-to-back and things like that. And even though the last game had a fair share of chances, that was also the game that took forever to play because of all the reviews.
Yes.
So anybody who is going to Scotiabank Arena for this game, maybe prepare for a longer night if we get a repeat of what happened last game.
Could be a bit of a longer evening, that's for sure. Why don't we take a look at the game preview, Dave? Let's chuck it up there, and we'll take a look and break down what we're seeing. The team matchup for tonight's game side by side. We're taking a look. You got the Leafs 16-7-2 against Washington, who's 17-6-2. So Washington, 1 win better, 2 points higher than Toronto in the standings, but pretty much neck and neck when you look at the league-wide standings. But the Capitals have been the better team in pretty well all aspects so far this season. They've played better at 5-on-5 in terms of expected goals. So the underlying numbers prove that they're, the better team. They've got a little bit of a better power play. The penalty kill is just literally a 1/10 of the percent better, but it's been better than Toronto's. And obviously the big discrepancy here, the Washington Capitals averaging 4.8 goals per game. The Leafs just 3.8 goals per game. So the Caps with a full goal more, which means Toronto going to have to continue to defend their asses off. They're going to be without Jake McCabe in this game. I think that's actually a pretty significant loss, considering this is a group that's been able to generate a lot of scoring chances, a group that's been able to score a lot when you're missing, one of your top pair defensemen, certainly one of your top shutdown D-man. That's a big hole. And, we're going to have to see if someone can kind of step up. We'll take a look at the lineups in a second. I believe OEL, though, is getting the matchup alongside Chris Tanev, and we'll see how it works out. But that's a tough task, especially without Jake McCabe.
It is, and they've been able to get by without McCabe, and his absence is notable.
Chicago and Nashville, the 2 worst teams in the NHL,
and they were like the Leafs didn't blow them out of the waters, right? Yeah, they held Chicago to 1 goal, they held Nashville to 2 goals, but those were, as you say, easier matchups. Now you get this is the true test. Right. And so
you literally go from the 31st and 32nd scoring teams in the NHL to the number 1 scoring team in the NHL without Jake McCabe. So it is way different, much tougher task.
For Craig Berube to deem him not ready to go for this game truly must mean that yes, they're probably being a little being a little cautious, but at the same time, it's this is a game I'd like to see Jake McCabe play if he was okay to play.
Yeah, this doesn't scream precautious anymore when it's 3 games in. That screams there's an issue to me. Like, this isn't precautionary anymore. That you lose me when you start using those words and he's missed 3 games, especially for how the season has gone for a lot of players who, oh yeah, we'll see day to day. We'll see how he feels tomorrow. And then we don't see the guy for another 3 weeks. Austin Matthews, to name one. So it is a little bit weird to me that he's not playing in this game. Perhaps they're just waiting to chuck him in on the second half of a back-to-back to have maybe fresh legs against Pittsburgh out on the road. That could be the case. And on the road, a little bit more difficult. You don't have last change, so it's harder to match up against. So you try not to get exposed as much. Maybe that is a reason for why they're holding him out Friday, perhaps to play him in the game against Pittsburgh on Saturday. But certainly a big loss for this team up against the Washington Capitals. On the other side, why don't we take a look at this Caps lineup and what it's looking like? We'll take a look at what the Leafs lines are and our locked on player to watch for the Washington Capitals. We'll get to all that more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NHL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NHL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more where you can place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com today. I'm taking a look right now. Maple Leafs favored on the money line at home in this game, -142. The Maple Leafs favored. You can make that wager over on FanDuel. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Network. The Locked On podcast, Locked On Leafs podcast continues. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. We've got new episodes coming out each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. You can find them free and available wherever you get a podcast and also up on YouTube. And we're previewing tonight's game 1 of a back-to-back. You've got the Pittsburgh Penguins tomorrow. So Toronto traveling cross-border to Pittsburgh for night 2 of the back-to-back, but they're at home against the Washington Capitals, an Ovechkin-less Washington Capitals, I might add, for tonight's game. Why don't we take a look at what the lineup for the Capitals looks like before we look at the Leaf lines? And again, no Alex Ovechkin, so it looks a little bit different than it typically does over the last few seasons, but still some quality players. Dylan Strome, top line center with Connor McMichael and Tom Wilson, Pierre-Luc Dubois with Alexi Protas and Taylor Radish, Andrew Mangiapane with Eller and LaPierre. You've got Brandon Duhaime, Nick Dowd, and Ivan Miroshnichenko rounding out the forward group. You've got Fairheavy and Carlson as the top pair. Rasmus Sandin, former Toronto Maple Leaf, alongside Matt Royce, the second pair, and then Jacob Chychrun and Van Riemsdyk as the third pair. They've been a tandem goaltending duo as well with Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren, but they've been doing the exact same thing that Toronto's been doing. One guy starts one night, and they've been rotating every other game, and last game was Logan Thompson, so I would expect Charlie Lindgren to get the start tonight, and Thompson, they play again Saturday as well, perhaps gets that start. So that's what the forward line looks like here, Dave. It's a pretty good group. It's a good roster. And you see a lot of players who have really broken out this year, and a lot of guys who are just, really, really having a good bounce back season. Pierre-Luc Dubois, Strome, a part of those guys, Mangiapane again, Chychrun as well. But really, it's that Alexi Protas and Connor McMichael who've really impressed me this year.
Yeah, two of their younger guys that, are getting those opportunities that maybe, it takes a little time for these guys to get to reach their potential. But, 23 years old, you're seeing McMichael, flash what we saw back when he was a player in the OHL. And then I know Poitras was a guy that it took a little bit of time, even for him. Like he was a 2019 pick. I think it was like a 3rd round pick from what I remember reading about him.
Yeah.
And, and not a well-known guy either. He guy played for like he's from Belarus. Like not a lot of players from Belarus in the league.
No.
Really nowadays. And, he's a guy that I feel like he had a cup of coffee a few years, like when he first came, and it took a few years in the AHL for him to really get his game going. And he's just like he's almost like ready to surpass his points total from last year. And he's 25 games into the season.
Well, he is our Caps locked on player to watch today. So why don't you throw that graphic up on the screen? Because Connor McMichael, you mentioned it, is having a pretty special season. And yeah, he's got 14 goals this year. 14 goals and 24 points for Connor McMichael. And I was quite surprised to see how many shots he's taken as well. For someone who played on the same line as Alex Ovechkin for most of the season, for him to have 72 shots was kind of wild. You could throw it up here if you've got it queued up. But Connor McMichael is going to be our locked on player to watch for the Washington Capitals. He's an impressive young kid, really impressive, and he's really coming to his own this year.
Yeah, he had 18 goals last year, almost had 20 goals. And again, he was one of those players when they selected him in the draft. Again, 25th overall. I was like, that's a pretty solid pick if they're willing to be patient with him, right? I feel like that, like those players who go late, if you give them the time to develop their games, again, London Knights kid, he's slow. Like, it took him a little bit of time, but he was a decent player with London. And I remember him in the World Juniors, pretty decent performer. It's just it was taking him a little longer to get himself there, but yeah, he had 33 points in 80 games last year, and he was 24 in 25. So I feel like he's arrived.
Yes, he has arrived, and the McMichael breakout is officially here. And as everyone who watches this on a regular basis knows that I'm a big card collector. And Connor McMichael, when he first came out, his Young Guns rookie card came out back in, it was the COVID year, so 2020, 2021. He was a decent chase because, again, had that pedigree as a first round pick, good junior player, and he was going and playing on a good team in the Washington Capitals. And it's taken him a couple of years. He kind of was a guy who fell out of favor and wasn't really all that collectible. You could find his stuff dirt cheap out on the market if you're looking for it. Now, Dave, big bucks for Connor McMichael rookie cards and autos and patches and all that. So it's kind of fun whenever I come across them in my collection. I'm like, ooh, I forgot I had this Connor McMichael card. It's now worth a lot more money than it was a year ago, a lot more. So it's always fun, when players like this have their platform seasons, their breakout seasons. So yeah, McMichael, a player to watch tonight for the Washington Capitals. Let's take a look at the Maple Leafs lineup, Dave, and we could go through it pretty quick because it's going to be fairly similar to the other night. We've got Matthew Nyes with Matthews and Marner. We assume, actually, because there's no practice today, but this is how the game finished the other night, and the assumption is, it was a pretty good third period. Maybe they stick around together. But Tavares with Nylander and Fraser Minton, Robertson, Holmberg, and Lorentz, and then Grabankin, Dewar, and Reeves. Ekman Larson and Tanev will be the top pair. Riley with Philip Myers, and then Benoit and Timmins. And again, if we do these, back and forth starts, Stoley, the goalie, would get the start in this game, right?
Yeah, it would make the most sense for the Leafs to go in that direction. It's a back-to-back. Both goalies are going to play, and I mean, Stolar was coming off an unreal game against Chicago. So I think the fact that they went with Wall against Nashville kind of solidifies that this is a true rotation. So it's pretty easy. Just think who played the last game, go with the other guy for the next one.
Yeah, makes sense. It's a back-to-back, so either way, both players are going to get starts this weekend. But yeah, no Jake McCabe, no Max Domi, who was skating but still not ready to go. Max Pacioretty not eligible, although I believe he is eligible on Saturday if he's healthy to be activated to play in the game against Pittsburgh. I guess we'll see. He has been skating for the last couple of days, but neither expected to play on Friday. I'm unsure if Saturday is an option for either of those two players, but neither going to be playing tonight against the Washington Capitals. All right, let's take a break, Dave. We'll come back. There was big news in the NHL today. Another coach fired. We'll tell you who that was on the other side. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti here. We had another coaching firing, and it seems like we get one at least once a week now. We're at that point in the year where if things aren't going well, that's the major bullet that's being fired around the NHL. And the latest one to get clipped was Luke Richardson, the head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks. They've lost 4 games in a row. They are now an NHL worst 8-16-2 on the season. And it's really just been 3 years of bad hockey in Chicago. I mean, yes, they got Connor Bedard out of it, but I would imagine the lack of development from Connor Bedard to this point in his sophomore season also played a pivotal role in Luke Richardson being shown the door here, Dave.
And you think about the guy that they brought in to replace him, right? It wasn't a guy on the bench currently. It was someone down the AHL, Anders Sorensen.
Yeah.
Who was their development coach. So clearly this is someone that they want to work with Connor Bedard, get him back on track. Like when you see his numbers, and look, I understand it's not a great roster in Chicago, but they did make it a point to try to piece together a more competent lineup around Bedard so they could see some growth from him. And we haven't seen that growth from him, right? He's still an unreal talent. We know that, but the coaches they need him to take that step because Chicago's not a team that wants to be in the basement this long, right? They've been through that before when they went through the whole Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews rebuild. They know it takes a little time, but you're seeing some teams right now trying to fast track that a little bit. And look, getting a Bedard puts also that pressure, right? The expectations that come with getting a Connor Bedard is you look at what the Leafs did with Matthews, you look at what the Oilers did with McDavid. They didn't want to be teams in the basement. They want to be competing because you want to be selling players on wanting to play with the Connor Bedard.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it was probably actually a good idea to bring in Anders Sorensen up from the AHL instead of just having someone else take over in the interim. Because I think it's good to get kind of an outsider perspective and someone who has been a very good developmental coach. Like Lucas Reichel had 51 points in 55 games under Anders Sorensen. He's someone they want to get going for sure. You look at what's going on this year in the AHL with the Rockford Ice Hogs, a team that was coached by Sorensen. Frank Nazar, who's a young player who's also a first-round pick a couple of years ago. He's got 24 points through 18 games. Kevin Kurchinski is playing well down there as a defenseman. Artem Levshunov, who was the second overall pick this past year. He's playing pretty good, significant minutes and has played pretty well so far. Samuel Savoy, like there's a lot of guys. Ethan Del Mastro, is playing well down there with alongside the head coach Anders Sorensen. So it does make some sense. Get some youth injected into this lineup. I'm sure with this, probably some of these AHL guys might get a chance to come up and play. Obviously, they know Sorensen. But yeah, I just think you look at how poor of a season that Bedard is having. I mean, this is a guy who a lot of people expected to really break out this year. And like you said, they did kind of add around him a little bit. Like they were able to go out and get a Teravainen. They were able to get a Tyler Bertuzzi. Taylor Hall was going to be healthy, and Nick Foligno was going to be healthy for a full season. It was supposed to be a decent crowd for him, but unfortunately, it just has not turned out to be that. And Connor Bedard is 5 goals, 14 assists, just 19 points so far on the year. And a majority of those have come in the last couple of games. He did go, 12 games in a row without a goal. It was an entire calendar month he went without a goal prior to like last week. So, yeah, Bedard, he's got to pick it up. That's for sure. And I think getting a new coach in here, someone who comes from a developmental background, should certainly help. And I don't think it's going to help the team do anything. No one expects the team to be any good, but at least they can be a little bit more competitive and see some growth from their younger talent.
Yeah, I also want to reference Michael Traco's talking a bit about Anders Sorensen. He was the coach for William Nylander as a junior.
Oh, really?
So there's a Leaf connection to. There's always a Leaf. There's always a way to make this revolve around the Leafs in some way, shape, or form, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah,
but
leave it to a Toronto-based reporter to come up with that one.
Yeah, so I'm very curious because I think Chicago is one of those teams that in a few years, if they do things properly, they can be a good team. You fired off all those great young players that they have, but you can have all these picks, you can have all these young players. You got to be able to develop them. They got to be able to take that next step. And I don't think it's all just relying on young players. I do think that this is also a team that needs to go out and add around it. And look, they thought they did that well enough with the additions that they made, but I mean, Luke Richardson, that's like also a weird one too, where he was like touted heavily as like a really good prospect for an NHL coach. Now, granted, Chicago wasn't exactly a dream landing spot if you're looking to have success right away,
right?
But you're also wanting to see a better record than he had: 57 wins, 118 losses, and 15 OT losses. It's not I understand. First year you were tanking for Bedard.
Yes.
That's going to eat into your wins-loss record. But at some point you want to see a little bit better than what has happened.
Yeah, and 3 years in to still be the worst team in the NHL, I'm guessing, especially after spending the money they did in free agency, that's not what they anticipated. And on top of that, for Bedard to be, not developing the way that they want, that I'm not surprised that Richardson ended up getting fired, and they want to try and see if they can get someone in there that can try and kind of reverse the tide a little bit here for this group. And yeah, his Anders Sorensen, his AHL record 117, 89, 16, and 7. So he's a winning coach in the American League. We'll see what he can do in the NHL level. But again, it's not necessarily going to come down to wins and losses for the Chicago team. It's going to be, are they developing? And are they seeing growth from the younger players? Namely, are they seeing growth out of Connor Bedard? Haven't seen that to this point this year, but maybe Sorensen can turn things around there. Anything else that you wanted to bring up here before we jet out for the weekend?
No, I haven't really seen anything else NHL wise to bring up. That ended up being like a big part of the news cycle, other than the Four Nations is like it's gonna be a lot of talk about Four Nations between now and the tournament in February. So be prepared for that.
Yes, yeah, there definitely will be a lot of that, but I will also say another goal. I saw another goal from Patrick Laine. So Laine heating up a little bit, heating up just a little bit for the Montreal Canadiens. They won 3-0 against Nashville. So the Preds continue to not find the back of the net, essentially.
Talking about coaches firings.
Well, that's 2 straight big games for Montembeault, though, since being named the third goalie for Team Canada. Back-to-back pretty solid outings for him.
It is, and it's one of those where maybe a little extra bump in the step, or how I can't remember.
Pep in the step.
Pep in the step. Thank you.
There
For
you
a player like that, I'm sure there was some nerves of whether he was going to be included, and I'm sure Montreal just hasn't also been a good defensive team this year, so a game against Nashville will help a lot of confidence for a team that's struggling defensively, I will say. But it's good to see that from Montembeault, because there was a lot of what's this guy doing on Team Canada. Even Brodeur spoke about that today. He was making the rounds, and he finds it mind-boggling the goaltending issues that Canada's currently having.
I mean, he didn't have a problem turning into an all-world goaltender. Neither did Patrick Roy, neither did Roberto Luongo, neither did Carey Price. But since that kind of run of 4 guys, no one's taken the mantle after Price. No one. Maybe you could argue Fleury, but like Fleury and Price were at the same time. So I guess that's kind of the same.
There hasn't been that next wave behind after them.
Yeah. No one after the 2005 draft, because Fleury was 03, and then Price was 05. So it's been over 15 years. It's been almost 20 years since we've had a goaltender drafted out of Canada that that turns out to be a stud. It's wild. Absolutely wild to me that it's been this long of a drought that Canada has taken. I do want to mention one thing, and I'm not going to mention it. I'm going to use it as a tease because we'll probably end up talking about it on Monday. So keep an eye out for Monday's episode. But Pierre LeBrun did mention today, don't know if he saw it on Overdrive, that he has an inkling that Marner will end up signing an extension prior to the playoffs, which is an interesting conversation in and itself, and one that I think we should get into on Monday's show. But that will do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys on Monday to recap not only Leafs and Caps tonight, Leafs and Pens on Saturday, and we'll be back Monday with the next episode. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.